North High School has a very interesting history. It started out in 1886. Before the building was built, the current site was an alfalfa field. It was owned by John Brisbane Walker, who was a wealthy man who owned Cosmopolitan magazine at that time. Throughout the last century, North has gone through a few changes. In this photo from 1915, you'll notice that Spear was not so wide then. You'll also notice a cross street on the left side that does not exist anymore. A long building housing the vocational classrooms was built across the street. Students were getting hurt crossing the street between classes, so they did away with the street and connected the two buildings with that perpendicular hall that you traveled through many times. We're talking about something that took place in the 20s or the 30s. Here's an air view of North High taken in 1927. Notice the interesting pattern of trees surrounding the area. One of the things that I found fascinating about North High are some of the famous people that have attended our school. Well, besides you and me, of course. Let's check our listing here and see if we recognize anybody. Way back in 1904, a well-known actress named Spring Byington graduated from North. She was active in the drama club and plays at North, and that served her well when she went to New York and Broadway in the 1920s, and when she was popular in the movies in the 1930s. But she is most remembered in the 1950s TV program, December Bride. She passed away in 1971. Checking our list here, we find some more interesting names of famous graduates. Here's one from 1913 that you already know about. Golda Meir, who was later Prime Minister of Israel, went to North High. And although technically she did not graduate at North, did spend over a year as a North student. She lived in a small duplex in South Irving Street and used to walk up Federal Boulevard to go to school. She later had said that she formed her philosophy of life during her Denver years. Going back to our list, we find a student who had a talent for music. He started out on the violin at age 7 and by 14 was playing with the Denver Symphony. His name was Paul Weichman. He had one advantage over his other North students. His father was Wilberforce J. Weichman, who was head of music education for the Denver Public Schools. Paul Weichman's first recording of Whispering in 1920 sold nearly 2 million copies. In 1930, Paul was known as the King of Jazz for his symphonic approach to premiering George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. That was also the same time that Paul hired some unknown new singer by the name of Bing Crosby. Wonder whatever happened to him. Paul Weichman was still alive when we went to North, and shortly before his death in 1967, Paul said that the Beatles were turning out some lovely things and said that if he were starting over again, he'd probably let his hair grow long and form a rock group. A few years later, in 1919, North High graduated Don Wilson. Remember the Jack Benny Show?
Broadcasting for the March of Dimes campaign in Denver, Colorado, the Lucky Strike program starring Jack Benny. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the star of our show. A man who is loved and admired by millions. Not only a good fellow, but a great artist. And here I am, Don Wilson.
Don, what's the idea of that introduction? I come all the way to Denver to do a show, and you introduce yourself as the star.
Well, Jack, Denver happens to be my hometown, and I didn't think you'd mind.
I wouldn't mind. Don, if that ever happens again, you'll be back doing spot announcements on KOA.
Don Wilson grew up on Wolf Street near the old Elitches. His father, Lincoln Wilson, owned a drugstore at 42nd and Tennyson. Don went to Olcott Elementary and later to North. He spent 33 years working as Jack Benny's announcer. Checking our list again brings up some more interesting names from the 1920s and 1930s. For the 1995 reunion we had, a poster of these names was made, and people were pausing in the midst of the merriment and studying the list carefully. If your VCR has a good pause button, some of you may later want to study this list further. In 1943, Barbara Bates graduated from North. Earlier, she went to Emmaus Parochial School. Her good looks got her on the cover of Life magazine in 1945. And as a Hollywood starlet, she got a number of roles in about a dozen films working with major stars. As we check the names from the 1940s and 1950s, we are getting into many names of people who are still active today. North has large numbers of alumni that contribute to their communities. Thousands have become successful in their fields and continue their education. Many have earned college degrees, a large number have volunteered time to various programs, others have accumulated fortunes. Besides you and me, has anybody from our class of 1964 made it big? Looking in our memory book that you may have gotten shows a lot of interesting accomplishments by our class. Beverly Martinez worked on Channel 2 News and had her own daily one-hour show. And Fred Villanueva was a local newscaster. He is currently working as a special TV reporter in Los Angeles. He was one of those doing a live nationwide report from a helicopter when a certain Ford Bronco was traveling very slowly on the Los Angeles highway. Some people took a long time to graduate from North High. The man you see here invented the ruby lacer in May of 1960. He was supposed to get his North High degree in 1944, but he finally picked up his degree on November the 9th of the year 2000. Paul Harvey tells the story.
When Ted Myman was a student at North High School in Denver, his family suddenly moved to New Jersey. That was 1944. Ted never did bother to re-enroll in high school. He did pass the entrance exam for Stanford, and then he became a member of the National Academies of Science, and one day he was admitted to the National Inventor Hall of Fame, but he remained a high school dropout. Until now, at age 73, when Denver's North High School has awarded him a high school diploma. In those intervening years, Theodore Myman invented the laser.
And now you know the rest of the story. Well, this concludes our history class for this period. The bell is about to ring, so let's get on with the reunion.